Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
I can't believe just before you hit the record button, you're accusing me of being a thief because of the way I started last week's intro.
Exactly, because you're touching my stuff and you're stealing it, and it was really confusing, but thank God I'm borderline amazing and can improvise.
Yes, you are borderline amazing, and you can indeed improvise. But the problem is, I'm not a thief, at least normally. But enough about whether or not I'm a thief and whether or not you're amazing. Who's on the show?
So today we have Brett Potter and his book Own Your Culture, which is not his first book, so there's other books to check out. Check out the same name. And we talk a lot about company culture, what it means, how to build one, what's the value of it, and how it really makes you competitive. However, before I go into an actual thought on that, what were your takeaways? Which should be your takeaways, not my takeaways.
Yeah, I was writing your takeaway down so I would know.
Yeah. I'll never tell him before. I'm just going to say now, I can have my takeaways. Let's go.
No, so my takeaways today are he used the word behavior throughout the book and in our interview today, that culture defines a lot of different things about mission and vision and values, but tying them down to specific behaviors of teams and of team members that are unique and are measurable. I'm like, okay, it's taking it that next level of making culture from fluff to something kind of more concrete. And I thought that was really, really good. We also talked about how you can do and bring culture to a new hire in the light of today's either truly remote, 100% remote, or hybrid working, in the way that we're evolving in this kind of pandemic. I won't say post-pandemic because we're obviously not post-pandemic yet, this pandemic era. And his response was clear and concise, didn't even hesitate. Document, and then document some more. Get it written down so that people can read exactly what is the mission, what are the vision, what are the values, and how do we expect you to act. I mean, I've known Brett for a number of years, so it's also a double pleasure for me to have him on the show. But tell us, Marcus, what did you take away from the interview today?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot there. And he talked a lot about also the previous book where he looked at culture decks and talked about Netflix and Asana and some really great performing, or Basecamp, really great performing companies, some very, very remote. So there's a lot of relevancy in there, and talking about what culture is. And yeah, he gave some great, simple descriptions of like, this is what it is. Everything else doesn't matter. This is the value. This is why it exists. This is why you should have one that's proper. And apart from that, he talked about some mission and vision statements are just not great. And I would totally agree with that. It's the same with some problem statements some companies are going into. They're really badly written. And I think there's a lot of work organizations should be do to inform whoever is working for them or wants to work for them to say, this is what we stand for, this is what we want, this is the problem we're solving, this is the reason to exist. Do you want to be part of that story, right? So that's just on the side note. I think the main thing I found, and that is for me quite personal, because in my nearly previous life I had full-time jobs and I haven't had those for quite a couple of years. I just been through so many companies where, and as he said, so cultural fit, if you work for a company, if you don't fit, your manager or yourself should be very quick about quitting, going somewhere else. And if you're a really, really good manager, a really good leader, help a person to move as quick as you can. Because the quicker you do that, it's not just the cheaper it is. It's also good because that person might know someone else who actually is a good fit, and they're going to refer those people likely if you treat them well, if you're just being a human being, really. But the big reason for that is that if you have to go to work every day and you have to pretend to be someone else, and he mentioned like actors getting paid a lot of money to act a couple of hours a day. And often between projects, they have to escape, have a break, because it's so draining to pretend to be someone else. It's a lot of extra energy you're using. They will definitely go away from the productivity you have and the energy you have and the happiness you have. It drains you, makes you miserable. All this extra energy, why would you put that on yourself why would companies expect you to have half of your energy used on trying to fit in? They want to use all your energy there, and so do you. So it's a major energy drain, which you can probably easily replicate or translate into financial benefits of saying, look, no one wins here. This is hitting the bottom line, this is costing you. Because if you perform better when you work someone, you are more likely to get a promotion, a higher salary, you thrive, you know better what you want to do and you're going to be better at what you're doing. So it's in no one's interest to pretend if you're in a cultural context that just doesn't fit you. So I found that just really profound, very important, and there's an immediate benefit to this that I think everyone should take on. That's my one big, big, big takeaway on that one.
And Brett had some really, really strong, clear, concise answers, unlike someone else that we both know who can tend to ramble from time to time. But enough about you, Marcus. Let's go to the interview.
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code wickedpodcast. I repeat, wickedpodcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Brett Potter. Hello, Brett. Nice to have you, and thank you for being with us.
Marcus, Troy, my pleasure. It's really great to be on the show.
Lovely. And as usual, we start at the top, which means can you please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book?
So my name is Brett Potter. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called CultureGene, and I wrote Own Your Culture because I wanted to write a tactical book on company culture. There are a lot of books written from a strategic perspective after the fact, and I interviewed leaders who were in the trenches, as it were, and I felt there was, if you look at Southwest Airlines 25 years later, all of the bumps and pitfalls are gone. It just looks gorgeous, and understanding that was what I wanted to try and do.
And Brett, this was not your first book, right?
Yeah, that's right. My first book is called Culture Decks Decoded, and I was really inspired by the Netflix Culture Deck, and read that and loved it, and then read Asana and loved that, and LinkedIn, and I just kept reading these things, and I realized over time that there were patterns to them, but I also realized that you couldn't take LinkedIn's and make it your own, but you could take parts of that or parts of Netflix and learn from it. So I created a template of how to write your culture down, really.
And the one thing I really am impressed by, but in both books, is the volume of people, the number of people, really high level senior access that you got that really brings a lot of the stories to life. How in the world did you get access to so many senior people?
Well, I'm quite lucky in that I've got a pretty good network in terms of having been in the tech industry for 20 plus years. But actually, the people who work on culture are actually really, really kind. They pay it forward a lot. I mean, Mark Organ, for example, who sold Eloqua to Oracle for 700 million. He gave me an hour and a half and then another hour and a half. And he said, if you want another hour and a half, I'd be happy to do it because he loves talking about it. He loves sharing it, and he wants other companies to know how to do it. And then they referred me on to other people and so on. So yeah, it was a really nice snowball effect.
Is there then therefore if I hear that and I just been in a project and I'm not going to name the company therefore is where you seem to have this really big gap between the people who really care so much that they give you all the things and they enable support and they want essentially the world to be a better place by having better companies and people enjoying where they work and thrive. And then on the other end you have people who maybe on the surface just sort of pretend it, and underneath you see there's no commitment, there's no engagement, there's no budget for it, there's just literally no action on that. And it feels sometimes there's a massive gap there in the middle. And so, do you actually have then? Do you have people from the dark side in your network, or is it just you're just lucky you picked sort of a couple of really good people and they gave you other people? It's a little like you go on, all your friends are the kind of people who agree with you, and the other people
Yeah,
they're not your friends.
yeah. The echo chamber was yelling back at me. No, so actually, it took me a long time to write Own Your Culture because I'm not a very good writer, and because I had to speak to over 500 companies to be able to interview just over 50. And so I'd be referred to a CEO, and they'd say, Jackie's building a great culture, go and speak to her. And they weren't on the dark side, but they were in the grey side in that they'd done some work on culture but didn't know what to do next. They'd maybe done vision, mission, values, and they kind of maybe done a little bit of work around it, but then it petered out and other things got in the way and other fires burnt brighter. So no, I fortunately don't know that many people from the dark side because I actually know that I wouldn't. I don't like it. It's not just because of my job, but I don't like people who don't care. So that dark side thing is not of interest to me.
So
I think it.
go
Sorry,
ahead,
I got one
Marcus.
more choice. Sorry, this is going to be going very excitingly, isn't it? So I just had a chat as well today with a training company who's a lot about culture as well and training managers and whatnot. They said the same thing, that you have most clients that come to them, they just don't know how to get there. So, and it's the same with anything from culture to digital transformation, change, and anything new, really. I think probably that people haven't done before. It's like, we like that thing on the other side, but what are the steps to get there, and what are the pitfalls, and what are the things to worry about, and how long is it going to take, and all these things. What sort of your average sort of first step to say, look, okay, you like that thing, this is great. So what's the first thing to do in order to step beyond the nice written initial top line comms like mission and vision statements and actually getting into some action that gets traction? So what's sort of the first thing you normally get to on that one?
So the mistake that most companies make is they define mission, vision, values, stick them up on the wall, or they did when we were in offices, and then hope that things change. And actually, most values are useless and worthless because they're open to interpretation. Many people can interpret many words in many different ways, and most human beings interpret for themselves first, not the company. So the companies that do this the best define what those values mean in an unmarketing, unsexy, very specific way. This is what we expect from you. This is the behavior we expect from you in relation to teamwork or in relation to inclusivity or in relation to whatever it is. So they're very specific in what they define. That means that you can recognize, you can reward, you can pay attention to, you can measure when these behaviors are enacted and lived. You can model them. It also means you can now be deliberate about embedding. And so embedding, you get across that little bridge to being able to embed your culture when you've defined it properly. And that's what most companies don't do.
All right. So before we can own it, we've got to define it. Before we can define it, we've got to have a good business reason for doing it. Culture is just so much fluff. I mean, we hear about it all day. What's the business value behind having culture and doing it the right way?
That's a great question. This I deal well. I don't deal with a lot of people with fluff, but there is a lot of the thinking around this. So 99.9% of what I'm about to say is always fundamentally true in every business. There's probably 0.1% where this isn't true. But culture is the one sustainable competitive advantage that you as a leader have complete control over. That statement answers that question. Maybe you've got some IP, maybe you've got brand, but most companies nowadays do not have this, the IP that comes with a great R&D realization, etc. And most companies have lots of competitors. Culture is the one thing that your competition cannot impact. The only way you can break your culture is by modeling different behaviors that are counter to your culture, and by hiring people who don't fit the values of your company. That's it. It is the most powerful asset you have in your business.
That's a really, really bold statement, that really competitive advantage is the thing that culture will deliver, and it's something that most CEOs have the most control over, as opposed to market forces or raw materials pricing or anything else. So I think that's what you were just saying, right?
Exactly.
Okay, good.
So I think when you look at that, then I would ask, and I'm a little bit reflecting back because I nearly promised the person on the phone call today to ask a couple of questions, and I forgot all of them. But essentially,
I think let me pick up on this. If you think if you
yes,
think if you think about um, as you were actually mentioning there, the cost of raw materials, the companies can throw more money at your problem. Companies can throw more bodies at your problem. Companies can market harder at your problem. But what makes the difference? It's the people, and what's the glue between the people? What makes us, you know, what makes us deliver on this product is the way we work together, the way we do things around here. And what is that? That's the culture.
exactly. I
So
think. So sorry to interrupt, and I will stop interrupting in a few seconds. That's exactly what I was just about. That for me, it's amazing to see that having worked for a lot of bigger companies, have all the money they really need, and they're failing. So what you just said is just so true. Money doesn't solve a thing. And there's an old historic lesson on that as well. I think the brothers Wright, who built the first actual working flying machine in a garage, at the same time, there was a really, really well funded, with high specialist kind of project going on at the same time. And it failed miserably because it had a lot of egos in it, a lot of politics, a lot of money involved, and that just got everyone into a very different. So they weren't there to prove a point and to have a mission. They were just there for the money and their own prestige. I think in that particular sense. And then some people over in a garage just overtook them and delivered something quite groundbreaking. And I've seen this again and again and it's exactly true. So money doesn't matter. It's the people, and the people will give you way more back for whatever you pay them, right? That's the thing. They stay happier. Um, yeah. So
if you,
the question is then, if it's not the money that makes a difference. So how do I then really connect with the people who work for me and say, look, this is not just a ploy to hit my business benefits. This is actually there's something more purposeful there, or something more to get excited about. How do you then really scope that? Maybe it's a bit of a question about how a good or bad mission statement looks like, because you just said there's a lot of companies who have good or bad or quite bad mission statements. So is there a particular thing that helps a lot to kickstart this in a particular way?
Yeah, I think the first thing to realize as a leader, if you're now, let's say you've been running the business for 5, 6, 7 years, I don't know, or 3, 4, whatever it is, and the business has grown rapidly, if you're now starting to think about culture, you probably have 10, 20, 25, 30% of the people in your company who are not a good fit with the values of your company because you didn't hire appropriately.
Mm.
So the first thing you have to realize is you cannot make everybody happy, but you've got to define the way you want your culture to work. And then the people who are not happy with that, you've got to manage out. Be nice to them and say, sorry, this is the way we're going to work. And I suspect you probably don't want to work here, or you've told me you don't want to work here. So let's work you out and bring somebody in, and we just, you end up as a good leader. But that for me is the first point: is you've got to realize that if you are starting and you've built a business to 120, 150 people, and you're really serious about company culture, there could be 40 of those people who shouldn't be in your company.
And a lot of these books talk about recruiting, hiring, interviewing. Almost nobody talks about firing. I loved that fact that in your book, you talk about how to manage people out of an organization in a timely fashion when it's needed, effectively and respectfully. Say more about that, because nobody talks about firing people.
Yeah, so if you think about, I use this example where If I don't fit with the values of a company, I walk in and I leave part of my personality outside the door when I walk into the office, and I wear a mask. I pretend to be somebody else, and actually pretending to be somebody else is damn hard work. Actors get paid a lot of money for it, and they do it for a couple of hours a day, but they don't do it their whole life. So if you're pretending to be somebody you're not in an environment, you are ultimately going to be unhappy. You may be, physically not great. The impact on this is really significant. And so by you as the leader realizing this and saying to the person, I know you want a job and I know it's important that you earn a salary, etc., but it's actually more important for you to go and work in a place that is right for you, to go and work in an environment where you can be your full self, because you're not being your full self here. It's better for the company, it's better for the person who's been let go, and it's better for the team, because the team pick up that you as the leader have hired somebody who doesn't really fit, and it actually starts to degrade the culture you're trying to build, because they're going, why did you hire him where the rest of us are like this, and he's clearly like that? And this is just not right. He doesn't fit with us. He doesn't fit with our values. And if you are now hiring him, are you going to hire more people like that? Is that where you're taking the business? Should I look somewhere else?
Mhm.
So the quicker you fire, the better. The speed with which you terminate and move forward, I believe, the better.
Time. Your microphone's dragging on your zipper.
Sorry.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So how do you see the hiring and firing in comparison to then saying, look, actually, you might think the people you have are not adequate for the next move or change or growing, but you can actually train them up or you can enable them to get there, versus I just fire all the people I think are not adequate and then I just hire new skills in. Because we know from, I think we had someone here from Deloitte who's working in the human research who says there's statistics that actually leadership has a very bad idea about what their people are capable of very often. So they often fire the wrong people. What's your experience between sort of firing and helping people move on to a better place, or saying, actually, I think we can get you there and you can stay here and it would be great and that?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of a muddying the waters here. So on the one hand, I'm talking specifically about fit with values of the company.
Mhm.
And so if the leadership have decided that we're moving from a familial, very close culture to a more aggressive, dynamic, high speed uh, culture, then you can evaluate the people and say, well, what will our values become for this business, and who fits those values? And the thing about values is you cannot teach a leopard, a new trick when it comes to their spots. They are their spots. When it comes to training skills, I completely agree with you. I think that the that we as human beings can learn many things. I guess often the business decides we need new blood. We don't feel that these people have got the capability. Whereas actually, if they were to sit down and give them the chance, they may well step up and take the opportunity. So I think there's the difference between hiring for values fit and changing values, being deliberate about changing values. So Microsoft, Nadella changed the values and brought in humility, brought in a bunch of stuff, and actually people left because they realized they were the Steve Ballmer types and they wanted to continue that way somewhere else and go lead a business in that way. But changing digital transformation initiative, unless it's highly skilled, most people can learn nowadays. We all learn digitally anyway.
So one of the things I talk about on and off throughout our podcast and a number of the authors that we've talked to is that, you know what? Some people just want to come in, they want to do their 8 hours, they want to collect their paycheck, and they want to go home. All of their passion and all of their energy kind of is outside of work. So it's just a job. It's just a job. over the last 15 years, we keep hearing that millennials are completely different. They come in and really values and purpose and intent are very, very important to them. And now I'm seeing millennials getting into managerial positions, and we're seeing the Gen Z crowd come in. How do you see these workforces moving through the system and the new entrants to the workforce? What do they think about culture today versus what happened, in the early noughties?
So in the early noughties, culture was a very rare beast indeed, and a hugely misunderstood company concept, except for in a handful of companies. Not a handful, but you know what I mean. So that environment bred the people who, the people experience that environment. Now this new generation is saying we want more from our companies. We want more purpose, as you said, more values, more reason to join your company. What I'm seeing is that they also do want a balance. So they want that balance of, yes, we'll find a place that we love and we will commit and we will work hard, but we're not necessarily going to kill ourselves the way you may have done and I may have done years and years ago. And this is the balance between finding that people from that generation who are prepared. If you want to drive a business that's hard driving and you need that extra mile and more, then those are the people you've got to find. They'll be harder to find in this generation. But I'm as they move into leadership, they seem to understand actually that, okay, well, I've got numbers that I have to hit, I've got certain things, and I now need to push harder, which is a funny. You almost see them become a little bit anti who they were the anti of a lot of cases, but that's just the reality of life, and that's just the reality of having cars and houses and things that you need to pay for. So I think, I think that's fair enough. I don't. Uh, I see more and more businesses, however, being much more sensitive and aware to this generation and creating benefits and creating environments that are well suited for them.
So the other aspect, apart from the new generation that is tends to come every couple of years, anyways. If you're looking at COVID, some people said, it accelerated digital adoption and change by about a good 10 years. There was suddenly this really big urge of, or this necessity to really, really change and get on with it. And I think here in the UK, the NHS, there were teams over there who suddenly had to really, really improvise so heavily and managed to do in amazing ways. We're literally now globally hit with an acceleration of change that likely a lot of companies didn't consider, so they were very comfortable, and now they're not anymore. Is there then even a place anymore for a culture that is, I don't want to say more complacent, but basically slower to change? Has that shifted the prominent type of culture that we have out there now?
Yeah, so every single leader that I speak to now, who I had spoken to pre-COVID, has moved culture up from top 10, being knocked out of the top 10, depending on the bushfire that was going on. Is now culture is now top 3, and in some cases top 2. And that's because the office did a lot of the work for us. The proximity, the availability, the visibility, the random informal communication, the et cetera, that an office provided, and the osmosis that made all of this happen meant that we could be lazy about our culture. We cannot be lazy about culture development now. If you do decide that you are going to build a culture that is very balanced, where some companies that are going four day work weeks, where you still put in the hours, but you do it over 4 days. Um, there's a lot of experimentation going on with different things, but if you do decide to do that, that's great. If your business can afford that, if you are in a highly competitive environment and you need to, take advantage of first mover advantage, then it's probably not going to work.
So when we're talking about pandemic, I've got a follow-up to the pandemic question, and then unfortunately we have always more questions than we have time. We're almost out of time already. But what do you think about hiring new hires when there's either totally remote working or hybrid working? How do you bring people into culture without human contact? That's the first question, and then I'll give another one as a follow-up.
Documentation, 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 and some more documentation.
Write it down.
So exactly, write it down. If you, I've researched Buffer, GitLab, Hotjar, Basecamp, Automatic, and a bunch of other remote work companies, and they, from my research, they over-index it in 9 areas, 9 best practices, and documentation is number 1. If it's not documented, it doesn't exist. If it's not documented, nobody can find out about it. If your culture is not documented, how do I have to wait on a Zoom call to find out how your culture operates? No, you can't. I can't afford that. I believe that the companies that are going to take advantage of this properly are going to be companies that define and develop hybrid work or remote work environments where they can demonstrate this is the culture we have built and this is why you will fit in this organization.
Okay, I'm going to finish the last question going back to where I started, kind of the challenging question, which is intended as a challenging question, but I know you, so I can challenge you, and it's okay. Culture is nothing more than fluff. In the ruthless capitalism in which we live in the majority of the Western world, it's shareholder capitalism. We've lost sight of employees, of customers, of society, of environment. It's all about the shareholders. How do CEOs and teams talk about culture having value to shareholders and to the board of directors?
So up until fairly recently, that was the case, where you could say that. But there is now the B Corp, where
Oh,
companies are
B Corps. Yes.
companies are now being designed around culture. There is the new stock exchange that Sean Ellis set up for culture-driven environments. If you look at the companies that are in the top 10, Amazon, the culture may not be right for me, but it is an incredibly strong culture, and if you fit that those values, then you will do well. Netflix, same sort of thing. So actually, you can build a culture that delivers what shareholders want. You don't have to build a culture that is destructive towards one of the entities of the environment. You don't have to build a destructive culture towards people to deliver shareholder value.
Yeah, it's no longer exclusive that every resource, including human resource, should be exploited in full.
Correct.
Brett, we've really enjoyed speaking to you tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for the great insights, and we wish you a great evening.
My pleasure. Great to be on.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.